Welcome to the Red Table. Pull up a chair and try not to scream. What's up, horror fans? This is session 2 of Welcome to the Red Table. Our first episode with discussion about Stephen King's It went over so well, we decided to do it again.
People really like to listen to us clown around, I guess.
I guess so. We're going to talk about The Thing tonight, but before we get into discussion about The Thing, we have a little chat with our good friend Chris Cavoretto from Werewolves in Siberia, who has a new album coming out titled The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night. It's going to be out just in time for Halloween, release date October 13th. That's a Friday the 13th for anybody who's been living up under a rock.
Yeah, that's going to be an exciting day for content, I think, from a lot of people.
Yeah, us included. I think I've got a title coming out, some short stories for young adults. Of course, probably everybody who's anybody that creates anything in the horror community is going to release something on Friday the 13th.
Hopefully.
So anyway, good times ahead. Let's have a chat with Chris, then we'll jump into The Thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Chris Cavoretto with us of Werewolves in Siberia. So excited to have you back on the Monster Guys podcast. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. Good to be back on.
Yeah, it's been a while. I thought maybe it was just the summer, but I think it was back in March when we last spoke to you on the show, and that's just too long. So what have you been doing all summer? Obviously nothing with all the music that I see coming out.
Yeah, trying to stay out of the heat. After I was on before, I kind of hit a little lull there, and I wasn't really doing anything. Usually when I finish up a project, I'm just done for a while, and then kind of wait for the inspiration to hit for the next thing, and then it's on. So I just go nonstop till that one's done.
Well, you've got a new project coming out. It seems like you've got a new project coming out about every other week. Man, I don't know how you write music so fast and still do it so well. I envy you. I wish I had your fingers on the keyboard or whatever it is you do to create that magic. But you've got a brand new project coming out that's due out, I believe, on Friday the 13th this year. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And it's called The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night. Tell us about that project.
That was something, I think, for some reason, I just happened to be looking up when all the Friday the 13ths were in 2017. I saw that there was one in October. I thought, okay, I'm doing an album that will be released on Friday the 13th in October. And until about a month ago, maybe even less, I had not started it. And I was like, okay, I should probably get on that. So I just kind of went with the flow, and it all flowed pretty well. So,
what is the inspiration for this album? I mean, The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night, I mean, that could go just about any direction within the realm of horror or dark fiction or whatever you want to call it. But what's your inspiration? What's this album about?
It kind of just started organically, and it was just going to be a Halloween-themed album. But the way it was coming out, it sounded a lot to me like John Carpenter sort of helping out with a Nightmare on Elm Street soundtrack. To me, it was kind of that nightmare and, go to sleep and the nightmare begins. You wake up and the nightmare's still there, So that's kind of, that's where it ended up going. I just kind of focused everything that way once that's where I thought it was going.
That's super exciting. I thought you were doing a Misfits album on this Friday the 13th. I think I got that confused because you do come out with a lot of music.
What I had planned on doing, I think last year for Halloween, I realized I was doing a Misfits song every year. I did one when I first started, and then I did another one about a year later, and then last year I did one that fell in October, and I thought, I'm just putting these out all together in October. And when I realized last year that I kept doing that, I figured I would just do a new Misfits cover every October and add it to the collection and release it for the month of October. It's always a free download on the Bandcamp page. This year, I have not nailed down a cover yet. I started a couple things, but nothing really worked. So there's still time, but I'm not sure there's going to be a new one. The EP will be available, though.
That's cool. But we have the thing that goes bumping in the night, so that's exciting
so
for me.
You get a full album of unreleased stuff.
All right, so tell me what goes through the mind of Chris Cavoretto while creating an album like this. Tell me what's happening to you inspirationally or psychotically or whatever it is you have to do to create this stuff.
Honestly, it's just kind of starting out with finding a sound that I like on that first song and letting the song come out organically, and then kind of getting an image in my head as the song's progressing, and then I kind of just let it all manifest itself, sort of, I'll get ideas throughout the day, and I feel like once I get onto a new project, it's pretty much all my free time is just focusing on getting that done. The next idea that pops in my head, I'm working on that until I feel like this thing's done.
So tell me, you've got a single off of this album that we're going to play in just a moment. Give us a little bit of background and information about this single from Werewolves in Siberia off of this album, The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night.
Okay. All right. So this song is The Chase Is On. And this is basically once the nightmare sort of manifests itself in the real world, and you realize it's not just a nightmare. This stuff is really going on. Then the energy that's sending everything to these people in this house, that starts to chase them. So that's kind of what this track is all about. The whole kind of a chase through the house kind of thing.
I feel like most of the time when I'm listening to Werewolves in Siberia, I'm being chased by something.
Means it's effective music.
That it does mean it's effective. I even remember when you were writing In Search of the Beast, the Monster Guys podcast theme song that you did for us. I just felt like something was behind me, breathing down my neck, and always there. That's kind of the feeling I get with Werewolves in Siberia music. Is that purposeful, or is that just kind of a natural flow from you as an artist?
I would say a little bit of both. I definitely try to capture that vibe, but it's not always exactly what I'm going for at first. But as I start kind of getting into it, it's like, okay, I need to make this creepier, or something like that.
Okay, so if we come see you live with your 80s cover band, we're not necessarily going to feel like something's running us down in the concert hall, right?
No,
Okay.
No, you're going to think, what the hell is this? This is the same guy?
All right, let's play this song real quick, and we'll come right back and finish up our conversation with Chris Cavoretto of Werewolves in Siberia. Here it is, the single off the new album coming out October 13th, Friday the 13th.
That's going to be a busy day for content.
That's going to be a busy day. This album's titled The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night, and this song is The Chase Is On. All right, there you go, folks. First peek into the new album by Werewolves in Siberia. Just simply stunning. And I can't wait to hear the entire thing. Of course, again, like we said, that's coming out on Friday the 13th, October 13th, just in time for Halloween. This is great party music or just sit in the dark and creep yourself out music, whichever one you want. Chris, tell us a little bit about how we can find Werewolves in Siberia, the music, and learn more about you. But also, because you have so much music out there, I swear you've got more music than most bands that have been going for like 40, 50 years, I think. Where do you recommend somebody starts when they're looking at Werewolves in Siberia? If you wanted them to start in one place and then go further, where would you tell them to start?
I would say the Bandcamp page first, because all the music is there, which is just werewolvesinsiberia.bandcamp.com. Yeah, that's a place to get the music. You can hear how it started, where it is now, everything in between. There's been a lot of progression there, but that's the best place. And then you could go to werewolvesinsiberia.com, which is linked up to a WordPress page, and here and there I'll write an article about something. And I try to keep news up on there. I don't do too well with keeping that going, but that's a good place. And then for anything, just kind of here and there, there's always a Facebook page, and then there's Cult of WIS on Twitter, where I'll just post random things throughout the day or whatever. And whatever horror movie I happen to be watching, I might be tweeting about that.
So Werewolves...
That's pretty much where...
Yeah, werewolvesinsiberia.bandcamp.com. That's where all the music is. And you can go to werewolvesinsiberia.com for a sorta updated listing of articles and random thoughts from Chris.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely go to the Bandcamp site. And I guess what I was asking earlier, if you were to tell somebody, start with this album when you go to the Bandcamp site, which one would it be? Or do you just start from the very beginning and go all the way through? What do you like people to do?
I think it kind of depends on what somebody's tastes are. Sometimes they like to start at the end and work their way back. Sometimes they start at the beginning, work their way forward. So I would say one or the other with that. I think that the In Memoriam EP that has your song on it is a good place to start and work their way back and hear kind of you can hear the progression in reverse. Or you can start with The Rising. And that was the first stuff I ever tried to do, and work your way up. I think everything's on the Bandcamp page in reverse there. So.
Yeah, I like In Memoriam, obviously, because our song's on that one. And you've got some other great songs for shows that you did on that one. I tell you, one of my favorites is The Dead House. And I don't know, I have songs from that album stuck in my head. And Michael can tell you, when we're watching horror movies together, I'll typically start humming one of the songs off of that album, and I'll just keep singing it because I like to drive people crazy.
We recently rewatched The Thing together to kind of pick it apart and analyze it, and I probably 5 or 6 times through that movie that happened. I think it's smack dab in the middle, so for people out there listening, I would definitely listen to Chris because he's the expert on the music, but I know I started with Dregs of Abomination. I think that's the album title, isn't it?
Yeah.
I played that on repeat for probably 3 days straight, and then after I didn't play the entire album on repeat, I just replayed Ghosts, which is on that album, on repeat for 3 days straight, because that's a fantastic song. So that is still one of my all-time favorites.
Awesome.
Yeah, Chris, you've also done music for a comic book, I believe a digital comic called Slice. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's an app called Stela, Stela, and it's available on there.
Okay,
and
so
then you can listen to the soundtrack as you read the comic.
So you've done comics, you've done Misfits covers, you've done inspiration from horror films. I mean, you kind of done it all under this horror synth banner, and I just think it's really cool. Whether you want some background music that's just cool and creepy playing in your house while you're taking care of business, or you want to listen to some music as a background while you're reading a story, or you just want to go through and pick out an album and try to figure it out, feel like something's creeping up behind you the whole time. Werewolves in Siberia is the way to go. You've also got a slasher EP. Was that one that was inspired by slasher movies specifically?
Yeah, it was actually that released on Friday the 13th last year.
Ah,
That was
okay.
the first time I thought, hey, I need to do something on Friday the 13th. And so I actually sat there and watched the first 6 Friday the 13th movies as I kind of put that one together. So it's definitely a Friday the 13th inspired EP there.
Nice. All right. Well, your next album on Friday the 13th is just a couple of weeks away now. The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night. Folks, get ready for this. You need this album for Halloween. So just prepare for download. And again, go check out all of go check out all of Chris's music at werewolvesinsiberia.bandcamp.com, and then just follow the links out from there to find out more about him and the different things that he's involved with. We love hanging out with you, Chris. Love chatting it up with you on Twitter. And again, I think you said earlier your Twitter handle, just to remind people, at Cult of WIS is where you can find Chris on Twitter. He's active there. He's active on Facebook. Drop him a line and let him know what you think about the album. Of course, we play your music on the Monster Guys podcast. We're playing your music on Scream Radio, and I think they're playing your tracks in regular rotation now throughout the day and throughout the evening. So you can hear Chris, you can hear Werewolves in Siberia in a lot of places, but where you need it is right between your ears. So get his albums so you can listen to him in your headphones.
That's deep.
Is deep.
Right between the eyes.
I'm a very philosophical kind of guy.
Between the eyes. Is that the third ear that they speak of?
Something like that. All right, Chris, thanks so much for hanging out with us, and definitely looking forward to this album. Of course, everything that you do, but this one's going to be even more exciting because it's on that special day. I think...
thanks for having me on.
I think horror fans are going to have enough to get involved with this year. I mean, Friday the 13th in October, I think it's going to take horror fans probably a couple weeks to catch up with everything that will be released on that day.
I was going to say, I know a lot of people, ourselves included, are planning on doing things on Friday the 13th, so that's a lot to go through this year.
It's almost the magical ritual go-to date. Yeah. For all things horror. All right, Chris, well, take care of yourself, man. It's good talking to you again. We need to have you back on the show again very soon. I'm sure you'll have another album out next week or the week after this one releases, because you do so much all the time. I can't even keep up with you. You make me tired just following you. Great job, and appreciate you being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right, thanks, Chris.
It's always good chatting with Chris from Werewolves in Siberia. Very excited about the release of The Thing That Goes Bump in the Night. What you just heard was a track from that album titled The Chase Is On. To me, Michael, this one kind of dips back to some of the influence of Deadhouse and The Dregs of Abomination, which are a couple of my favorite albums from Chris. And you've got plenty to choose from, by the way, because the guy's got like probably 2,000 albums on Bandcamp.
He's got a lot.
Yeah, so check him out, werewolvesinsiberia.bandcamp.com. You'll definitely want to get your hands on that. It's perfect music for this time of year. All right, let's dive into The Thing. Now, the thing about The Thing, there's all kinds of jokes you can play with this. It's just like It. You can't hardly say it, there it goes again, without having some kind of pun roll off your tongue or in your head about these titles. Yeah, accidentally, on purpose, whatever. We're not going to try to make a lot of puns, but some of them will probably crack anyway. So the thing about The Thing is that it's not just a movie. It didn't even start out as a film. It started out as a short story back in 1938, I believe, by Joseph W. Campbell. It's considered to be one of the greatest pieces of horror and sci-fi literature written. Just like the film, and particularly the 1982 John Carpenter version of the film, was considered to be one of the greatest horror movies, if not the greatest horror movie ever made. There are a lot of people that think that. I know that there are a lot of people that don't. We're not going to try to make that distinction here, but we're going to talk about it because all of it is a great piece of entertainment that has stood the test of time.
I mean, it's a story that seems to reoccur. You know, we're in a season of reboots in Hollywood where you have a new Lara Croft coming out, you have the umpteenth Spider-Man coming out, you have Spawn being rebooted. You have different iterations of The Thing, but they're not all necessarily reboots. They're all their own version, if you will. You also have...
Let me just say, I need to stop you here. I think we've been in 30 years of a season of reboots in Hollywood. There's not a whole lot of fresh that's coming out.
When you go back and look, there are actually a lot of... I think people are expounding on the reboots of this year and last year and the next year to come, but Hollywood's always recycled stories. But I think The Thing is a little bit different, other than the 2000 film, which I wasn't a big fan of, and I know a lot of people were disappointed with.
The 2011?
Yeah.
2011 film. There's a 1938 short story, which started it all. 1951, a film called The Thing from Another World. Then there's the 1982 version, which is the most popular and most well-received, I think, in most circles.
Yeah.
John Carpenter's version. And then there's a 2011 version of the film as well.
And now there is a card game called Who Goes There coming out soon, I guess. I believe it just finished on Kickstarter not too long ago. I did not get to see if it passed or not, but it looks pretty snazzy. And then there's also a board game called The Thing Infection at Outpost 31, which looks pretty fantastic. So this is a story that doesn't just reoccur. It reoccurs in different media and to very different audiences. It's really stuck through the test of time, I think.
Yeah, by the way, we are not receiving any kind of kickback for mentioning these games or these films. These are just things that we love to talk about, so there's no push either way, but we would definitely recommend, if you're a fan of this film or of horror, go check these things out. Most of them are created by independent artists. We love to support indie artists.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've got a couple of games that are spinning off of this. You got the 2011, the 1982, the 1951, and back to the 1938 story. Where do we start in all this? Because this is such an enduring story. I think there's some big questions to ask. There's a lot of people who have done significant, deep, and detailed analysis
of everything.
of everything about this story, and we're not going to try to replicate any or all of that. We're just going to talk about it from a fan's perspective, break down a few things, and try to do some comparison analysis without repeating everybody else. But where do we start with all of these different versions of this story?
Well, I think that hits the nail on the head. The thing that, there you go, the aspect of the story that I think people pick up on, and the reason it sticks with us, is that it is intelligently written. The 1938 short story was very intelligently written about a group of several individuals at a camp that were all specialists in their own field. They were all scientists. You had a biologist, a meteorologist, a physicist, and then several others who were all very intelligent people in their own fields of work. You didn't have just this group of teenagers going out to a cabin in the woods like you do with several other short horror stories. And I think at that time, horror literature, horror stories were a bit classier anyways. You didn't have a whole lot of slashers, to my knowledge, but still, these were all very intelligent characters within this cast dealing with what they knew could be the end of the world. And that story picks up in each of the iterations afterward. I think the 1951 version, The Thing from Another World, it wasn't as focused on that. You still had very intelligent characters, but the script was smartly written still. It was very funny. I think you and I both were... I like black and white movies, but I was really tired that night and I was afraid of falling asleep when we stopped to watch it. But, it was very funny and very smartly written. The script was fast-paced. It was catchy. We were laughing our heads off through the downtime of the, if you want to call them, scary scenes.
I really enjoyed, a lot more than I thought I would, that version of the films, probably to the extent that the 1951 version of the film, from an entertainment standpoint and from a writing standpoint, may be my favorite of the three films.
There's some people that say that a lot.
Again, like you said, it was very intelligently written. It was humorous. I think I was trying to live tweet while we were watching it. Some of the quotes coming off of it, I didn't get too many because they just kept coming so fast. But the script was snappy. And of course, you're back in an era where acting was very different. Even your speech patterns and your tone of voice was used very differently in film. And the number of people that were constantly talking, it's very different than it is today, whereas you're having sometimes very slow conversations and certainly not a whole lot of interruption. You go back to that era of film and you got a lot of people talking. You got a lot of people spinning off jokes and one-liners, and it's like the rest of them don't even pay attention to it. They just keep going with their own thing. So the pace just is super fast. And that particular film doesn't go into the gore and the cosmic monster as much. Even though it's an alien from another world, it's much more human than any of the others.
Some people compare it to the Frankenstein, Universal Frankenstein
and that's
movie
evident.
monster. And I enjoy it for the story. It does not strike the same level of paranoia and fear as Who Goes There or John Carpenter's The Thing. And I think that's why people seem to steer toward his movie more, is because that sense of paranoia is really what drove the first iteration, the short story.
Yeah, but if you go back and you look at the 1951 film, again, consider the time frame.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S. especially, but at a little bit on a global scale. In North America especially, we were thick into the whole fascination with UFOs and aliens and men from Mars and all that kind of stuff. It was in the news. You got all these crashes and these sightings starting to pop up. So it was very relevant. And that aspect of that film would have been terrifying, a cause for paranoia for a lot of people in that era, because that was the focus of fear. Are we being invaded? What will they do when they get here? You know, and then you have this film that's based on this wildly successful and well-written short story that brings that to light in such a way that if this guy is what he is, or if this creature is what it is, we're doomed.
Right.
And they go into kind of a seeding standpoint with the plants and, you know, the DNA sequencing and all that kind of stuff with the plant life versus this assimilation or consumption type creature that came out in the 1982 and even was more in the short story.
Yeah.
So think 1951, think what's big, think what's dark, think what's scary then. This film still captures it.
Yeah, definitely.
And does so with a lot of humor and that previous, I would say almost the golden era of Hollywood style of acting and dialogue and even the way they're presented on screen. It's a really classy piece of film history.
Definitely. And then you have James Arness in there, who is a big actor. He was the monster, but he was known for being in Western movies and all sorts of different TV
like
shows
for
and stuff.
people who are fans or who may not know, James Arness was the guy who was like the leader on Gunsmoke for like 20 years.
So that was a big
Huge.
selling point for them as well, and they had that cast for it.
And he was, I think, 6'7".
Oh, he was huge, and you
He
can
was
see
very
it.
tall.
You know, he definitely looks like that big scary monster.
Yeah.
That classic movie monster. So it definitely had its own standout moments that were really enjoyable. Going back to the intelligence of the writing of each set, though, I think what has made John Carpenter's movie such a big hit, for me, growing up, it was always the special effects. The special effects hit to this day. There are only two scenes that look fake to me.
Well, when you say fake and when you say special effects that work, put it in the right context, because this is not going for realism.
Well, right. But they were very convincing effects, and it was almost seamless. There were only two scenes that looked cheesy, I should say, to me. But it should be noted that they do something in that film that is a script writing rule, but they do
All
it
right, but
to
wait a
the
second.
nth degree.
What are the two scenes to you that look cheesy?
Okay, during the
Are you
blood
afraid
test,
of getting mauled by the fans on this? Okay.
During the blood test scene, when the thing is revealed as one of the people, you know, you see that person stand up and start changing into the monster to try to take out some people before, you know, they come and kill it. There's a moment where his face changes and he starts to, you know, his face opens up into this mouth and he starts to devour another guy. And it looks like, when he starts to devour that other guy, it looks like a puppet instead of a body. So that part's a little bit unbelievable for me, not because of what's happening, but just because the special effects didn't quite hit the mark as the rest of the movie did. And then, of course, at the very end of the movie, they go into an almost claymation sequence where you see the final iteration of the thing in its monstrous form. And it looks very much like another character that's been running around the camp for a while. And it's still okay. It just doesn't hold the same level that it has throughout the entire movie for me. And it
All
always
right, be
stuck
careful,
out.
Michael, that you don't draw the ire of many Thing
fine with
fans
that.
around the world.
I'm fine with that. In fact, I think that's actually one of the bigger complaints about the movie is the last sequence in the basement. The Thing almost changes its style.
Yeah, it does a lot.
So but it's, it's the climax of the movie. It's the big sequence where, it's supposed to be the last horror moment. So until you get to the final question of the movie, the last moment of the movie that's quiet and subtle, but people have been arguing about for the last 20, 40 years, however long it's been out, of whether or not one of the two surviving members was infected. So that's always a fun thing to go back to. And I think that was my point originally, was that because of the intelligence of the writing, there are so many little facets that you can pick up on that, a lot of Hollywood movies these days, even in the commentary, people will go back and they'll explain everything. They didn't do that for The Thing.
Yeah.
There is a lot that is never explained, but you can pick up little details. Like we were watching the analysis of a certain scene, and I had never noticed that the guy drops his keys during a certain scene. You hear it clearly, and they talk about it very offhand in the movie and other scenes, but it doesn't show him dropping the keys.
And this is the keys that actually unlocks the refrigerator for the blood. And it's a very significant piece of the story because it throws doubt on everybody, but who got it, who broke in,
who has the keys.
Yeah, and then the keys end back up with Gary and
the captain.
Yeah, and it throws an enormous amount of suspicion on him, which then you see almost violent reactions begin to take place. Yeah. But this is all surrounding the drop of a key or a set of keys that which you never see.
You never see on screen, but you hear it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that whole philosophy is used throughout the entire movie, where you get to a nth degree of show, don't tell. And it's very powerful, and it causes fans to this day to stop and try to pick apart the movie. And that's really impressive, considering what year we're in now, that people are still trying to analyze and dissect a movie from 1982.
And still trying to replicate it.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
That's hard.
I think one of the things that's interesting to me in a lot of the dialogue about this is that we learned that the film was delayed by a year.
I didn't realize that.
So John Carpenter had a chance to go back and really detail and focus on writing and certain aspects of each scene throughout the film. And he even says, it gave me the opportunity to do those things over that year, and probably the film wouldn't have been what it is if I didn't have that delay. So he went back very deliberately and threw so much detail into, just like another aspect we were listening about, were the colors of the clothing.
Yeah.
And the coats, and which scenes people had coats and which scenes people had certain shirts and certain pants and which scenes they didn't. And by this, you could tell when the creature was attacking and who was infected. There's clues all the way through, and John Carpenter, I think, alluded to the fact very clearly that that delay in filming gave him the opportunity to go back and focus on some of that writing and focus on some of the details in those scenes. That creates the mystery and the power of this piece of cinema that it was.
Yeah, and I think at the core of all of this is the fear of the thing itself. It's very powerful. It's, I was talking to you about how I think it's what zombie movies should be, but that's probably a little watered down.
Yeah, but hang on a second. Before you go there, that's an aspect that needs to be broken down because it's different in each iteration.
That's true.
Go back to the story where it all began. Let's talk about the thing there and what it is.
So most of you are familiar probably with at least the 1982 version. So the original version was interesting because it happens very linearly. There are less events, I should say, that happen than in the 1982 film. The 1982 film does really good at keeping true to the story, but you have a lot more happening throughout a little bit longer course of time. In the original story, you have the 37 members of the outpost that basically find the craft, take the thing out of the ice, take it back to, the camp and they're trying to decide whether to dissect it or not there, or to try to get it to New York to dissect it. And then, of course, it wakes up. And they discover its different abilities through the course of basically one scene. It stands out because he packs such a level of paranoia into really just 2 chapters of that short story, where it is not just a physical fear of being taken over. We see the physical changes that you go through in the movie, where you become something else. But in the short story, it goes into greater detail of how the thing must be, it sends them dreams at night.
You're dealing with a psychic level creature in the original short story?
One of the scientists there, he's not the biologist, because the biologist is Blair, the same guy who goes kind of nuts in the movie and starts breaking all the equipment to make sure that people can't escape. He goes nuts in the story as well, and there's another, I can't remember what he does. He does some sort of body science or something, but he is talking about how it wouldn't make sense that it can just physically imitate creatures. It actually would have to know its thoughts, know its emotions, know its history in order to completely imitate a person. And so they figure out that these dreams have been happening, they all kind of share the same ideas through these dreams, and they're like, oh, well, it is psychic. And there's another scientist, it was kind of funny because of what was going on at that time. There's a scientist that's like, hey, will you believe in psychic stuff? And he's like, I have to. There's a professor at university that proved that it was a real thing to me, so I have to believe in these things. So I know that it is a psychic creature now. And the fear of that was that there was one person that was suspect in that moment in the short story as being the thing. And they were all looking at him, with him in the room. He's like a wild animal. He's in the middle of this group that's almost ready to kill him, looking around and saying, I wish you could see your eyes right now looking at me. You look like you're a mob about to kill me. And the scientist in the corner is saying, he is reacting just like he normally would. In order for the thing to be able to completely imitate somebody, they would have to know exactly how they would react.
Yeah, and I think there's an allusion to this whole psychic thing in the 1982 version.
There is.
That basically says an imitation isn't enough. It has to be a complete takeover.
They never say that, but after reading the story, to me, it's pretty clear that it still happens. There are some missteps, of course, on the character part, so that you can actually pick up when somebody is infected if you look close enough in the story. But those cast of characters, they're not going to pick up on it because there's so much paranoia going around. It's thick with that paranoid aspect. But going back to the short story, at the end of the short story, after the blood test that they perform, there's a moment where the guy performing the blood test looks at the captain, who's also given his blood to clear this other guy. So this blood test basically clears the guy in suspect, saying he's not the thing. However, the two guys who were conducting the test look between each other in fear because they say, our blood has come out to say that one of us is a monster. The implication of that is that they don't even know who is infected.
Yeah, they don't even know if they're infected. There's no way to tell.
Because that creature, it's almost a spiritual level of infection at that point, because it infects so perfectly that they don't know if they're just continuing to do what they would normally do because that's the way it can get out of camp.
Which is the real terror.
It's
in that story terrifying. Is that there's a creature that could completely come in and not just assimilate you, but completely consume you spiritually, emotionally, physically, and become you without you even knowing it and take over you. And I think the bigger implication there and the bigger terror in all of that is it wouldn't just happen with a couple of people or an isolated group. It would quickly become a global phenomenon, and the entire human race wouldn't even have known that it had been taken over.
Yeah, and that's what they basically say. They talk about it taking over the world, and he's like, what? So he's going to become one lone dictator? And he says, no, it's going to become its population.
Right.
And that, on one hand, you might think, well, what's so bad about that? You continue on with your daily life. But they talk about how if this thing's attacked by a killer whale, it would just become the killer whale. If it's attacked by an eagle, it would become the eagle. So, yeah, you don't know if you're infected, but that point where it's attacked by something else, it's, you're gone. Its body becomes whatever it needs to, and you no longer are yourself.
Yeah.
You're lost.
Which really points to the level of distrust in the story among characters and in the films that, let's face it, you want to break down a group of people, break down their trust between each other. Especially,
and they definitely do that.
Yeah, especially in an isolated location where they've got no communication, that's hard enough as it is. If you've ever studied those type of environments and know what it does to the human mind and body and everything else, this is times 10, and then add in a creature that can take over and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
So it really ramps up that level of terror. And so the thing for me is a lot more science fiction than it is horror, but the horror comes into play psychologically more than it does. Even though like 1982, there's a lot of gore, there's a lot of physical
Yeah, it's
violence and everything.
really weird body horror.
Yeah, I still believe that this entire story wraps up its horror side with the psychological and the spiritual side of things versus, to me, the body horror and the gore and everything is pretty boring. I'm not a big fan of that across the board. Even though they did what they did and it was effective and there's a lot of fans because of that, I believe the bigger terror is the spiritual and the emotional and psychological side of this.
Honestly, I think that's where the 2011 film went wrong. Is number one, they replaced practical special effects with all CGI stuff, from what I remember, and it looked cheesy.
And you just can't do that with people's holy grail.
Yeah. So, but the other thing is, I think they focused too much on that.
Yeah.
I liked that aspect. It's very Lovecraftian. It's very cool looking. It's very interesting, and it's exciting when it's pulled off and done right. But that is where the horror was the psychological aspect. You might say, "Oh my gosh," when somebody's stomach opens up into a mouth and chomps off another guy's arms. I mean, that's very effective. But the scarier part, just like that ending sequence between the two guys, is the thought that one of them is the thing, and after everything else that has gone on in the film to make sure this thing doesn't escape, it's probably going to still escape.
Yeah. The spiritual side of this has me intrigued. From the very beginning, from the story in 1938 all the way through the films, the spiritual aspect, and some would even go so far as to say the religious aspect of this story remains intact. The writing in 1938, it had a religious overtone, it had a spiritual overtone, and yes, those are two different things in my opinion, and we can get into that discussion completely on another day. That's actually my field of expertise professionally and my background, but let's just take it from a religious aspect for a moment. The 1938 short story, there's a lot alluding to the Christian God. So the religious and the spiritual aspects of this story maintain its center throughout all of its iterations. Some of it more subtle, like as in the written story, it's more subtle on a spiritual level, but the verbiage is there and it carries through. You listen to the dialogue in the 1951 film and you hear a lot in that film if you know what you're listening for. From the very beginning, when they find the craft, the reporter begins talking about...
I think he says something like, this is the biggest news since the parting of the Red Sea, or something like that.
Yeah, he gives that statement about the Red Sea. Later on, he talks about comparisons to Noah and the Ark and Noah's Day. Throughout, you have little drops of this religious speak that's breaking through. Some of that may have been due to the era of time in the U.S. and connecting with that level, kind of keeping a sense of balance between something that's from Mars, because they keep calling him the man from Mars. We found the man from Mars. This is the most significant discovery, and all the stuff about outer space, bringing it back to Earth by connecting with people where they are in the U.S. religiously and spiritually at the time. But then if you fast forward to 1982, and I've read a couple of different analyses on this, but it's there as well. But it's in different form. The language that's used, even in what people would consider the cursing or the foul language or the arguing or the violent threats or the innuendos people put forth in the script, it still maintains this God, Jesus, Judeo-Christian form. Even though it's in what many would consider a more blasphemous tone, it's still there. And then there's this scene where MacReady is out checking on Blair in the shed, and he turns to him as he's leaving and he says, an answer to one of his questions, just trust in the Lord. Which to me was just like, where did that come from?
Yeah,
that was so starkly out of place, but yet when you look at it as a whole, it was almost an honorarium to the original story in its spiritual overtones, and he just drops that in there and then goes on about his business.
And, the original story is much more subtle about it, but it definitely has that feeling. And I think it's an interesting contrast between faith and science, if you will.
It's a huge conversation between faith and science.
If you want to make it about that, one of the the biologist actually, that Blair, who kind of goes crazy a little bit, he was talking about, the design of the creature as they're looking over it over the first time when it's still in ice. And there's a guy that's talking about how that face is evil, the red eyes, it's angry. And Blair says, well, as a biologist, his point of view is like, you have no right to say that. This might have been a peaceful look on its face at its planet. It might have been happy on its street or something. You don't know anything about this creature. And the other guy's reply is that, look at that. That was never designed to be at peace. That was never designed to be a good creature. This was purely evil. So you take a bunch of scientists that are arguing now about ethics, if you will, and about whether something is intrinsically good or intrinsically evil, and about the concept of being the life form being designed.
Right.
So it's an interesting part, and it doesn't take up too much of the story, but it definitely stands out as an interesting talk for that time, and it continues on through 1982, and it, everybody knows it continues on through this day.
Yeah, and I think it's a powerful conversation just from a theological study. And from a study of science and religion, you're putting that many people into that isolated location and then dealing with something that's well beyond their scope of belief and even their scope of conviction, and challenging all of that. And do you survive it? Does humanity survive that level of conversation? And I think it's relevant even for today. I think we're seeing that clearly throughout the world today. And it's just another one of those themes that horror and science fiction can address through story and raise the challenging questions without preaching to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the Thing is doing it in each of the films and the story.
It is, and I think it really rounds out that story. In each version of the story, you have paranoia, you have body horror, you have the spiritual overtones and even undertones, if you want to call them that. You have a very well-rounded and intelligent story, as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong with slasher films or, your average horror movie, but it doesn't stand out as an average movie.
Yeah, this is not an average story. It's not an average film. From the very beginning, like you said earlier, it's very intelligently written. It's smart at every level.
And we talked about this as well with The Thing, but I mean with It. Vague movie titles.
Yeah.
But we talked about how it has a larger cast of characters.
I'm gonna do a movie called Stuff. I'm just gonna create a horror movie called Stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to think of another vague word, but I think those three may take the cake.
Stuff.
But you have a larger cast. And, you had pointed out that not everybody's important, and that's true, but you have a story.
Well, I think I said not everybody is central.
Yeah, but these things take a larger cast than a lot of your other horror movies, and I think that's part of what makes it stand out. Is you have, in a place of paranoia as well, where you don't know if the guy next to you is this infected human or not. It really makes it a dangerous place to be in a crowd.
That certainly spreads throughout the crowd, and that paranoia and that distrust just compounds on itself the more people you add to that mix. And then, of course, this particular story, being in an isolated location, but still having such a large cast, kind of compacts it.
Yeah.
And really squeezes the pressure in the environment, whereas let's say, another film like you were talking about on our last session, it has got a large cast, but you've got an open community. You can travel city to city. Here, you can't. You're done.
Yeah.
You may find another outpost from, like in the 1982 version.
But we all know how that went.
Yeah, but you're very limited on how far that goes. And so that tension and that distrust and paranoia really ramps up at different levels.
Definitely. So I think we'll see this story continue. I mean, as I said, this is going into tabletop games at this point, which was a huge surprise to me, but a really pleasant surprise, and I can't wait to hit my hands on both of those. But I think we'll see it continue. And I hope the next time somebody tries to make this into a film, it goes back to its roots a little bit.
Yeah, inevitably somebody's going to attempt to bring this film to light again.
For better or worse.
Yeah, if they do, listen, folks, if you're listening and you're the one that's going to do this, touch it carefully.
Spend a year on it.
I mean, spend a long time on it. You can't just come out of the gate and throw new technology on there and try to make it shiny. It's just not going to work.
Can we just go back to practical effects, period? I mean,
I
there's
think a lot of people
who
agree with
do
you.
CG well, but practical effects still look better.
Yeah, they do work. They're real. They're connectable, and I believe a lot of people agree with you on that, on the practical side of filmmaking, and I would be one of them for the most part. I do like some CG, but not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it does look okay if you do it right.
But this definitely stands out. The story, the films, as an enduring piece of entertainment history, literature, film, and so on. Now, like you said, I think it's the smart thing for fans to do and creators to do is to go into things like games, tabletop games, card games. Those universes can expand and really stay true to the story and to the environment and everything without, like the 2011 film did, just slapping on new technology and hoping it passes. But and I'm not knocking the 2011 film. I know there's a lot of people who liked that one. There's a lot of purists and a lot of horror fans that don't for a lot of reasons. And I think both camps have some valid points. But for the sake of this conversation, I think we have to go back to the core of it all.
Yeah.
And the core of this is very real. It's visceral. It's inside of you. It's taking over. It's in your head. It's in your hands. It's everywhere. And that's hard to pull off with computer animation.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a little bit of our conversation on The Thing. Like I said earlier, there are so many different people who have approached this from, varying angles and
it's fun to go look at those.
And analysis, yeah. I would certainly, we're not claiming to be the analyst on this that ends all analysts by any means. I would certainly encourage you, if you're interested in this level of conversation about this or any film, go look it up. There's some cool resources out there, both written and in video and audio. I would start, though, by going and downloading either the PDF or the audio version of the 1938 written story. That is a beautiful piece of literature. If you're a fan of this, you need to read it. You need to spend the time to do that.
I myself really enjoy reading things off of a page, but if you do look for an audio version, the version by, I think his name is Edward French, is very well done. There are a lot of people that have compared him in that version to Vincent Price at times. He does the voices very well. Right. So it's a really creepy thing to listen to. He does the insanity in their voices very well.
So tuck into that story, and then if you haven't, I would encourage you, I would certainly recommend checking out the 1951 film, The Thing from Another World. It's a completely different style, different take, but it is thoroughly enjoyable. That version, I think, Michael, we found at our local library.
Yeah, we did.
And checked it out. Couldn't find it really anywhere else, but the library had it. So you may have to search for a couple minutes or go to the library, but that would be well worth your time. Of course, most people listening to this or who are fans have seen the 1982 and 2011 versions, but round out your experience with the whole picture and then go back and really put some thought to it. In the meantime, if you have thoughts, analysis, or insights on this movie that you've gathered or that you've read about or heard, we'd love to hear about it. Talk to us on Twitter at The Monster Guys. You can do so on Facebook as well. We're on Instagram, YouTube, any of those places, but Twitter's certainly a place we love to hang out at and have some cool conversation. But we'd love to hear from you about it because, obviously there's a lot we haven't covered and a lot to this story that is just fun to talk about. So if you've got some insider analysis or opinions, throw them at us. We enjoy hearing those, even if you disagree with us.
Yeah, definitely. And Twitter's always a fun place to have those deep analysis conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Deep analysis in 140 characters or less.
It's difficult, but it's fun.
So anyway, folks, we hope you've enjoyed this session of Welcome to the Red Table. The next session coming up in a couple of weeks, we're actually dipping a little bit into some comical horror from a couple of different angles, literature and film. We're not going to tell you which ones. It's a more recent release that we've recently viewed, and it is both hilarious and terrifying, and it hits all the right notes in those spheres. So Please stay tuned and join us. In the meantime, you can catch us on the Monster Guys podcast or any of our other story podcasts. Find us at themonsterguys.com. That's kind of like the great hub where you can find everything. And then chat with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And if you're listening on Scream Radio right now, thanks for tuning in 24/7, 365. Horror radio. It's not just a podcast. This is a radio station, and really impressed with what Tracy is doing with the station and all the different narrators and storytellers and creepypastas and interviews and everything that's taking place there. So tune in, stay tuned in. I think you can download an app for Scream Radio and just have it going constantly wherever you are. We love hanging out with you here. If you're finding us in any of our other locations, hey, thanks. Thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it, guys. Good night.
Good night.